The heavy oak door of the boardroom clicks shut behind me, the sound unnervingly final in the opulent silence. Here we are again. Elise, my sister, sits at the head of the long, polished table, her perfectly manicured hands clasped. Her eyes, usually sparkling with feigned innocence, are wide with a carefully constructed panic. It's another emergency family meeting, which always means one thing. Elise needs money and I'm supposed to provide it. This time, though, something is different. Not in the room, not in their expectant faces. Father's stern, assessing gaze, mother's anxious flutterings, but in me. I've seen this play out before, every line, every gesture. I'm reborn, you see. I've lived this life, made all the sacrifices, and died alone, forgotten by the very people I propped up. A faint, bitter taste floods my mouth, the phantom echo of a lonely hospital room. Elise launches into her practice speech, a tale of woe about a can't-miss investment, a temporary setback, a surefire return. Just a signature, that's all she needs. My signature to co-sign another massive loan. In my past life, I'd have been halfway across the room, pen in hand, eager to please, to be needed, but not this time. I meet Elise's gaze directly, my own steady, unblinking. The air in the room crackles with a sudden, unfamiliar tension. No, I say, just that, no. A shocked silence descends. Mother gasps, a hand flying to her pearls. Father's eyes narrow. Elise's carefully crafted composure cracks, a flicker of genuine alarm in their depths. They didn't realize yet that their perfect lives, built on my sacrifice, were about to completely unravel. The refusal hangs in the air, thick and suffocating, long after I've left the sterile opulence of the family company's boardroom. Back in my small, quiet apartment, a place they've always scorned as beneath me, I replay their reactions. Elise's face, stripped of its usual saccharine sweetness, had contorted in a brief, ugly flash of panic before she'd quickly schooled it back into wounded bewilderment. Mother, Diana, had looked at me with an expression of profound disappointment, as if I'd just spat on a sacred family heirloom. And father, Raymond, ever the pragmatist, his expression had been one of cold calculation. Already recalibrating, I'm sure, trying to figure out this new, unexpected variable in his carefully managed equation. The expensive wine they'd undoubtedly be pouring now, the kind that costs more than my monthly rent, would be doing little to mask the scent of their rising desperation. My sister, Elise, even as children, she had this uncanny ability to twist reality to her liking. I remember one sweltering summer when I was 10. I'd spent weeks meticulously tending to a small vegetable patch in our grandmother's garden, coaxing tiny tomato and cucumber seedlings to life. When they finally bore fruit, I was bursting with pride. Elise, who hadn't lifted a finger, paraded the first ripe tomato into the house, presenting it to Mother with a triumphant flourish. "Look what I grew," she'd chirped, and Mother, without a second glance at my dirt-stained hands and hopeful face, had cooed over Elise's green thumb. It was a small thing, but it was the blueprint for our entire lives. She took, I gave, she shone, I faded into the background. A few days after the disastrous family meeting, Elise calls. Her voice, usually so bright and commanding, is now a trembling, pathetic thing. I just wanted to apologize. She begins, the lie so transparent it's almost insulting. I shouldn't have put you on the spot like that. It was unfair. I listen, saying nothing, letting the silence stretch. I know this tactic. This isn't an apology. It's a reconnaissance mission, an attempt to gauge my new defenses, to find a chink in the armor. When her feigned remorse meets only my quiet breathing, a hint of her old impatience seeps through. Are you even listening to me? I said I was sorry. I heard you, Elise, I reply, my voice even. Well? She pushes, the tremor gone, replaced by a familiar edge of demand. What do you expect me to say? I expect you to understand that things are different now, I tell her, and I can almost see her perfectly sculpted eyebrows shoot up in surprise. Mother Diana is a master of a different kind of manipulation. Her currency is guilt, her weapon of choice a sigh laden with unspoken disappointment. She's always prioritized Elise, the fragile, beautiful one, while I was the strong one, the one who could handle anything, which usually meant handling Elise's messes and Mother's emotional fallout. A week after my no, Mother appears at my apartment. It's the first time she's visited in over a year. She carries a small, velvet-lined box. I was just going through some old things, she says, her voice soft, almost melancholic. She opens the box, revealing a collection of my childhood trinkets. A chipped porcelain ballerina, a faded blue ribbon I'd won in a school spelling bee, a tiny silver locket from grandmother. I remember how much you loved these, she murmurs, picking up the locket. Grandmother would be so disappointed to see us like this, divided. The implication is clear. You're tearing this family apart. You're hurting your grandmother's memory. In my past life, this would have shattered me. Now I just see the carefully chosen props, the well-rehearsed lines. They're just things, Mother, I say, my voice gentle but firm. And grandmother always valued honesty above all else. Her eyes, which had been glistening with unshed tears, harden slightly. I don't know what's gotten into you, she says, her tone shifting from sorrow to a more familiar note of disapproval. But this selfishness is not like you. Maybe them you knew is just who you needed me to be, I reply, and the confusion in her eyes is, for a fleeting moment, almost satisfying. Then there's Father, Raymond, a cold, calculating businessman to his core. He never had much time for scraped knees or bedtime stories. His affection, if you could call it that, was always conditional, tied to achievement, to usefulness. He valued my financial acumen, the way I could untangle complex spreadsheets and spot lucrative investments. Skills I'd honed not for myself, but to bolster the family business, to make him look good. He calls me a few days after Mother's visit, his tone all brisk efficiency, no hint of the recent family drama. I have a business proposition for you, he says, as if we're two executives discussing a merger. A new venture, high risk, high reward. But it needs a quick injection of capital, your capital, to be precise. He outlines a plan that is, in essence, a thinly veiled attempt to get his hands on my money, a way to bail out whatever disaster Elise has cooked up, while once again putting me in the line of fire. In the past, I would have seen it as a chance to finally earn his approval. Now, I see it for what it is. Another calculated move to exploit me. Father, I say, a weariness seeping into my voice that I don't bother to hide. I'm not interested in any more of your high-risk ventures, especially when the primary beneficiary seems to be Elise, and the primary risk, as always, seems to be mine. There's a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Are you questioning my business judgment? I'm stating my position, Father, I reply. My finances are my own now. The click as he hangs up is sharp, decisive, like the closing of a ledger. And then there's James, my ex-fiancé. The man who, in my previous life, had shattered the last vestiges of my heart by sleeping with Elise. The man whose betrayal had been the final, crushing blow. He's been conspicuously absent since my rebirth, which has been a small mercy. Until today. I'm at my favorite small cafe, the one with the worn velvet armchairs and the scent of old books and freshly ground coffee, trying to enjoy a rare moment of peace. And then, there he is. Fancy meeting you here, he says, that familiar, charming smile playing on his lips. A smile that once made my stomach flip and now just makes it curdle. He looks different. There's a confusion in his eyes, a flicker of something that might be remorse, as he takes in my changed demeanor. The spine that's a little straighter, the gaze that doesn't shy away. James, I acknowledge, my voice cool, devoid of the warmth it once held for him. You look well, he says, a slight frown creasing his brow. He's clearly expecting something. Anger, tears, a dramatic scene. He's not getting it. I am, I reply, and take a deliberate sip of my latte. He lingers, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Elise told me about the family meeting, about the loan. Did she? I keep my tone neutral. She's really upset, you know, he says, his voice laced with a hint of accusation. She feels like you've abandoned her. And what do you feel, James? I ask, my eyes meeting his. He looks away, a flush rising on his neck. I just think families should support each other. Indeed, I say. But support is a two-way street, isn't it? Not a one-way pipeline. He has no answer to that. He mumbles something about having to leave and makes a hasty retreat. As I watch him go, a strange sense of detachment washes over me. The pain of his past betrayal is still there, a dull ache in the background, but it no longer has the power to cripple me. He's just another ghost from a life I'm determined to leave behind. Later that evening, back in the sanctuary of my apartment, an email pings into my inbox. The sender is anonymous, the subject line cryptic. A word of warning. My finger hovers over the delete button, then, on a hunch, I click it open. My blood runs cold. Attached are documents, internal memos, leaked financial statements, all pointing to one undeniable truth. The family business, a cornerstone of their perfect lives, is teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. And there, in black and white, is a detailed plan, a strategy memo outlining their intention to use my inheritance from grandmother, the very inheritance that had been my ruin in my past life, to save themselves. The pieces click into place. Elise's desperate plea, mother's emotional blackmail, father's business proposition. Even James's sudden reappearance. It was all orchestrated, a multi-pronged attack designed to manipulate me into surrendering the one thing that could give me a fresh start. They haven't just underestimated me, they've given me the roadmap to their destruction. And this time, I'm the one holding the pen. The email was a cold slap of reality, but the betrayal that followed was a more insidious poison, seeping into the cracks of my already fractured trust. It didn't take long for the whispers to reach me. Mother and Elise, a formidable duo in their campaign of manipulation, had begun spreading rumors. I was unstable, not herself, making irrational decisions. The narrative was clear. They were laying the groundwork to challenge my control over grandmother's inheritance, painting me as mentally unfit to manage my own affairs. Mutual friends, distant relatives, even some of father's business associates. The calls and messages started trickling in, laced with feigned concern that barely masked their morbid curiosity. "Are you all right, dear?" they'd ask, their voices dripping with insincere sympathy. "We heard you've been under a lot of stress." A few weeks later, I found myself at the wedding of a family friend's daughter. It was exactly the kind of ostentatious affair my family reveled in. A sea of designer dresses, glittering diamonds, and air kisses that never quite landed. I knew my attendance was expected, a test of my composure. So, I went. I smiled through the backhanded compliments. "You're looking surprisingly well, all things considered," and the pitying glances. The champagne bubbles tickled my nose, a stark contrast to the tightness in my chest. The air was thick with expensive perfume, a fragrant cloak attempting to mask the scent of insincerity and barely concealed gossip. Every smile felt too tight, every laugh a little too loud. I moved through the crowd, a ghost in a borrowed dress, observing them all, these people who had known me my whole life, yet knew nothing of the woman I was becoming. But I wasn't just passively enduring their judgment. While they whispered and speculated, I was making my own moves. The anonymous email had been a catalyst, a spark in the darkness. I'd tracked down Mr. Abernathy, grandmother's former attorney, a kind, elderly man with sharp eyes and a fondness for peppermint tea. He'd been unceremoniously dismissed by my parents shortly after grandmother's death, a detail that had always struck me as odd. Now I understood why. In his dusty, book-lined office over several cups of tea, he confirmed my worst suspicions. Grandmother, a shrewd woman who had seen through her children's grasping nature, had put safeguards in place for my inheritance. Safeguards my parents had systematically dismantled in my previous life. But Mr. Abernathy, loyal to grandmother's memory, had kept meticulous records. He not only helped me secure every last penny that was rightfully mine, but he also unearthed a forgotten file, a dossier of sorts, detailing some of father's past financial misdeeds, risky investments, creative accounting, things mother had quietly covered up for years to maintain their pristine public image. The information was dynamite. The annual charity gala hosted by the Children's Literacy Foundation was the jewel in my family's social crown. They always made a grand show of their philanthropy, their names emblazoned on plaques, their speeches full of hollow platitudes. This year, however, there was a new major donor. Me. As the master of ceremonies announced my name, a hush fell over the ballroom. All eyes turned to me as I walked to the podium, a quiet confidence settling over me like a familiar cloak. I spoke of grandmother's passion for education, her belief in the power of words. And then I announced my donation, a substantial sum in her name, to establish a new literacy program. The catch? It came with specific oversight requirements and an independent auditing committee that would scrutinize every penny spent, requirements that would inevitably bring to light the foundation's, let's just say, flexible handling of funds under my parents' previous stewardship. From the podium, I had a clear view of my family's table. Elise's carefully applied makeup couldn't quite hide the sudden startling pallor of her skin. Father's hand, the one resting on his whiskey glass, trembled almost imperceptibly. Mother's smile was frozen, a brittle, unconvincing mask. The polite applause that followed felt like a tidal wave, washing away the last vestiges of their carefully constructed facade. I didn't linger. I made my excuses, a polite smile still in place, and walked out of the gala, leaving a trail of shocked whispers and dawning horror in my wake. As I stepped out into the cool night air, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. The message was short, electrifying. "I've been waiting for someone to finally stand up to them. Let me help you." The gala had sent ripples through our small, insular world, but my family, ever resilient in their self-preservation, scrambled to regain their footing. Their next move was as predictable as it was distasteful. A hastily arranged family dinner, the kind usually reserved for major announcements. And major it was. James and Elise, beaming with an almost manic brightness, announced their engagement. Elise's diamond ring, a gaudy monstrosity, glittered aggressively under the chandelier, a vulgar testament to their supposed happiness. James, looking distinctly uncomfortable despite his plastered-on smile, kept trying to catch my eye. He was clearly expecting a reaction. Tears. A jealous outburst. Perhaps even a desperate plea for him to reconsider. He seemed almost disappointed by my placid congratulations. The clatter of silverware and expensive china seemed to echo the hollowness of their celebration. The engagement cake, a towering confection of pastel frosting and sugar flowers, was cloyingly sweet, almost nauseating. I watched them, these two people who had caused me so much pain, playing out their charade of love and commitment, and felt nothing. Or rather, a cold, clear-seeing detachment. Elise, in a display of what she probably considered magnanimity, asked me to help plan their engagement party. "After all," she'd said, her voice dripping with false sincerity, "you have such good taste, and it would mean so much to me to have you involved." I agreed, of course. I listened patiently to her extravagant demands. A champagne fountain, a live band flown in from New York, a guest list that read like a who's who of the city's elite. I took meticulous notes, nodding and smiling, playing the part of the supportive sister. They mistook my compliance for acceptance, my silence for defeat. They had no idea that their engagement party was about to become the stage for their next public humiliation. While Elise was busy agonizing over floral arrangements and seating charts, I was orchestrating a different kind of underscore party. Father and James had been desperately trying to woo investors for a new, high-stakes real estate venture, their last-ditch attempt to salvage the crumbling family finances. I arranged a series of discreet meetings with these same investors. I didn't need to lie or exaggerate. I simply presented them with carefully selected, fact-based information. A history of my father's previously failed ventures, courtesy of Mr. Abernathy's files, an honest appraisal of the current project's overvaluation, and a clear picture of the family business's precarious financial state. The truth, as it turned out, was far more damning than any fiction I could have concocted. Simultaneously, I set another, more personal trap. James, for all his protestations of undying love for Elise, had a well-documented history of infidelity. It was a weakness I knew well. I introduced him to an old acquaintance of mine, Isabella. She was everything Elise wasn't. Intelligent, successful in her own right, with a quiet confidence that was undeniably alluring. I didn't have to do much. I simply made the introduction. mentioned Isabella was looking for advice on a new business venture, and let James's ego and wandering eye do the rest. The engagement party was everything Elise had dreamed of, a glittering, ostentatious affair held at the city's most exclusive country club. The air buzzed with forced gaiety and the clinking of champagne glasses. And then the dominoes began to fall. First, a hushed murmur rippled through the crowd as two of the city's most prominent investors, men Father and James had been courting for months, made a quiet but very public exit. Then another, and another. Their polite excuses about prior commitments did little to quell the rising tide of speculation. Across the ballroom, I saw Elise's eyes dart nervously towards James. And she found him, not by her side, but in a secluded alcove, deep in conversation with Isabella, his expression a little too animated, his hand lingering a little too long on her arm. The look on Elise's face, a potent cocktail of shock, fury, and dawning humiliation, was a masterpiece of raw emotion. The carefully constructed facade of the perfect couple, the perfect family, shattered. Whispers turned into audible gasps. Father's face was a mask of thunderous rage. Mother looked like she was about to faint. James and Elise began to argue, their voices rising above the sudden, awkward silence. Accusations flew, blame was hurled back and forth like a poisoned volley. And me? I stood quietly in a corner, sipping my champagne, an island of calm in their self-created storm. As the party imploded around them, my phone vibrated. The mysterious texter again. This time it was a photo, a close-up of an antique safety deposit box key. The message beneath it read, "Your grandmother left more than money. Tomorrow, 9 a.m., National Bank. What you find will change everything." The fallout from the engagement party was spectacular. Elise and James's relationship was in tatters. The family's financial desperation was now public knowledge, and the whispers about their impending doom were growing louder, but they weren't beaten yet. My family had a cockroach-like resilience when it came to survival, especially when their lavish lifestyle was threatened. A few days later, I was at the family home, a rare visit, prompted by a vaguely worded summons from Mother about family matters. As I walked down the hallway, their voices, low and urgent, drifted from Father's study. The heavy, polished hardwood floors of the old house seemed to amplify their whispered conspiracies. "The vacation home is our last liquid asset," Father was saying, his voice tight with stress. "We have a buyer, cash offer. We sign next week." Mother murmured something about needing to act quickly before the creditors start circling. My blood ran cold. The vacation home. The charming, slightly ramshackle beach house that grandmother had specifically, unequivocally left to me in her will. It was the one place filled with genuinely happy childhood memories, a sanctuary from the suffocating atmosphere of our primary residence. They had, of course, conveniently forgotten to inform me of this particular clause in the will, keeping the property and its potential sale hidden from me. When they finally remembered to tell me about the sale, their faces were masks of feigned regret. "It's for the best, dear," Mother cooed, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. "With things being so tight." Father grumbled something about sentimental value not paying the bills. I played my part, feigning ignorance of the will's true contents. I sighed, looked suitably disappointed, and then, with an air of reluctant acceptance, I made a suggestion. "Why don't we all go down there one last time?" I said, my voice laced with a carefully constructed nostalgia. "For closure. Say a proper goodbye to the place." They exchanged a quick, relieved glance. My apparent capitulation clearly suited their narrative. A final family trip, a poignant farewell, little did they know I was planning a very different kind of closure. The next morning, at precisely 9 a.m., I was at the National Bank, the antique key clutched in my hand. The bank manager, a stern-faced woman named Miss Albright, led me to a private viewing room. The safety deposit box was old, heavy, and bore grandmother's initials. Inside, nestled amongst yellowed legal documents, was a thick envelope addressed to me, in grandmother's familiar, elegant script. My hands trembled as I opened it. It contained a letter and a series of underscored documents that made my breath catch in my throat. Grandmother, it turned out, had been far more astute than I'd ever realized. She had suspected how my parents would treat me, how they would try to control my inheritance. She'd set up a separate secret trust, one that would only activate under specific circumstances. Circumstances that proved I was no longer under their thumb, that I was capable of standing up for myself. The trust was substantial, far exceeding anything I could have imagined. There were also meticulously kept records, copies of bank statements, and notarized affidavits, detailing exactly how my parents had diverted and squandered my original inheritance in my previous life. It was all there, a damning testament to their greed and deceit. The family trip to the beach house was a strained, uncomfortable affair. Father was antsy, clearly eager to get the sale finalized. Mother flitted about, sighing dramatically and reminiscing about better days. Elise, sullen and resentful after her public humiliation, barely spoke a word. While they were busy packing up phantom memories and squabbling over worthless trinkets, I slipped away. I had an appointment. I met with the local county planning officials, armed with a survey map and copies of property deeds. It turned out Father, in his usual arrogant disregard for rules and regulations, had, years ago, illegally extended the property line, encroaching on protected wetlands. A fact I was more than happy to bring to their attention. The day of the signing arrived. The buyer, a smug-looking developer with predatory eyes, was already at the house, his lawyer by his side. Father, a pen hovering over the sale documents, was practically salivating at the thought of the impending cash injection. And then, right on cue, two uniformed county officials arrived, accompanied by a stern-faced environmental protection agent. They served Father with a cease and desist order for the illegal construction and a hefty fine for the environmental damage. The developer, his face paling, quickly backed out of the deal, muttering about undisclosed liabilities. But the real showstopper was yet to come. As Father was still sputtering in rage, a courier arrived, delivering a thick legal envelope. Inside, addressed to Raymond and Diana, was a set of irrefutable legal documents, prepared by Mr. Abernathy and backed by the contents of Grandmother's safety deposit box, proving my sole, unassailable ownership of the beach house and a restraining order preventing them from setting foot on the property. Mother collapsed into a nearby deck chair, her tears this time shockingly real. Father's face, usually so controlled, was a mottled canvas of crimson and purple, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. Elise just stared, her mouth agape, the fight finally draining out of her. As their carefully constructed world crumbled around them, as the tide of their own making threatened to drown them, my phone lit up. The mysterious texter. "It's time we meet in person," the message read. "You're ready for the final phase." The address led me to a discreet, upscale cafe in a quiet part of the city, far from my family's usual haunts. I spotted her immediately. She was older, perhaps in her late 50s, with intelligent, kind eyes and an air of quiet competence. It was Martha, Grandmother's former personal assistant. The woman my parents had unceremoniously fired a week after Grandmother's funeral, claiming redundancy. I'd always felt a pang of guilt about that, a sense that she'd been treated unfairly. "Martha?" I asked, approaching her table. She smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached her eyes. "Please call me by my first name. It's Eleanor. Martha was what your grandmother called me. It's so good to finally meet you properly, my dear." Over chamomile tea and scones, Eleanor unraveled a story that left me breathless. She hadn't just been Grandmother's assistant. She'd been her confidant, her most trusted ally. Grandmother, acutely aware of her children's avarice and her granddaughter's gentle nature, had enlisted Eleanor's help years ago. "Your grandmother loved you very much," Eleanor said, her voice soft. "She saw your potential, your intelligence, but she also saw how easily your family manipulated you. She worried about your future, about what would happen to you and her legacy after she was gone." After being fired, Eleanor hadn't just faded into obscurity. Fueled by a fierce loyalty to Grandmother and a deep sense of injustice, she had spent years quietly gathering evidence against my family. Every shady deal, every hushed-up scandal, every instance of their cruelty and greed, she had documented it all, and, in parallel, using her own considerable acumen and a small bequest Grandmother had secretly left her, she had built her own successful investment firm. She was a silent guardian, a hidden force, waiting for the right moment, waiting for me to be ready. The anonymous emails, the texts, I said, realization dawning. That was all you? Eleanor nodded. I needed to see if you had the strength to fight for yourself. Your grandmother always said you were stronger than you knew. She just needed a reason to find that strength. Then came the biggest revelation of all, the safety deposit box, the secret trust that was only part of grandmother's plan. Your grandmother was a remarkable woman, Eleanor said, a fond smile playing on her lips. She believed in second chances, but she also believed in learning from your mistakes. She created another, even larger, secret trust. Millions, my dear. But it came with a very specific condition. She leaned forward, her eyes sparkling. It would only activate when you not only stood up to your family, but when you began to reclaim what was rightfully yours, not just financially, but in terms of your own self-worth and power. It was a test, her way of ensuring you wouldn't be a victim again. She produced another antique key, this one more ornate than the last. It unlocked a heavy, leather-bound ledger she pulled from her briefcase. Inside, behind pages of dense legal text, were documents with gold seals, share certificates, deeds to properties I never knew existed. A hidden empire built by grandmother, protected by Eleanor, and now waiting for me. The sheer scale of it was overwhelming. The scent of old paper and expensive ink filled the air, the tangible aroma of a future I'd never dared to imagine. Together, in the quiet sanctuary of Eleanor's elegant office, we began to plan the final phase. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice, about reclaiming what had been stolen, not just from me, but from grandmother's legacy. The family business, Miller and Son, had originally been built on grandmother's seed money, her shrewd investments, her business savvy. Father had merely inherited it, and Elise had treated it like her personal piggy bank. But the truth, buried under years of Raymond's bluster and Elise's extravagance, was that I had been the quiet genius behind its most successful ventures in my previous life. My strategies, my insights, all claimed by Father as his own. Now it was time to take it back, legally, decisively, a complete takeover. While we plotted, my family's world was imploding. The news of their financial ruin was spreading like wildfire. Father's already fragile health took a nosedive under the relentless stress. He looked years older, his once commanding presence diminished, his eyes haunted. Mother, stripped of her social standing and her charitable committees, who now wanted nothing to do with the disgraced Millers, was a shadow of her former self, her days filled with anxious phone calls to increasingly unsympathetic friends. Elise's fairy tale engagement to James had predictably disintegrated. James, his own reputation tarnished by association, had cut his losses and run, leaving Elise to face the creditors and the public humiliation alone. Their lavish lifestyle, once a source of pride, was now a suffocating burden. Every overdue bill, every canceled credit card, a fresh humiliation. They were drowning, and the safety net they had always relied on, me, was gone. Looking back, I could see the transformation in myself so clearly. Each act of defiance, each small victory, had been a stepping stone, rebuilding the confidence and self-worth that had been systematically eroded over 2 lifetimes. In my past life, I had been a doormat, a convenience, a means to an end. I had lived in the shadows, constantly seeking their approval, their affection, and receiving only crumbs. Now, standing on the precipice of reclaiming everything, I felt a sense of calm, of quiet strength. I wasn't the frightened, eager-to-please girl anymore. I was a woman who knew her own value, a woman who had stared into the abyss of her own destruction and chosen to rise. Eleanor placed a reassuring hand on mine. "Tomorrow," she said, her voice firm, "at the emergency board meeting they've called in a desperate attempt to salvage what's left, they will finally understand exactly who you have become. And they will understand that their perfect lives were built on a foundation you are about to reclaim." The thought sent a shiver down my spine, not of fear, but of anticipation. Tomorrow, the final curtain would fall on their charade, and I would be the one directing the scene. The emergency board meeting was a somber affair. The usual air of smug self-importance that permeated the Miller and Son boardroom was gone, replaced by a palpable tension, a sense of impending doom. Father, looking frail and defeated, sat slumped at the head of the table. Mother and Elise were there too, not as board members, but as desperate supplicants, their faces etched with anxiety. Eleanor, by my side, presented our case with calm, irrefutable precision. Share certificates, legal documents, proxy votes meticulously gathered from disillusioned minority shareholders. It was a watertight takeover. The family business, built on grandmother's vision and propped up by my unacknowledged efforts, was now legally, unequivocally, mine. One by one, they approached me after the stunned silence had given way to the harsh reality of their new circumstances. Father was first, his voice raspy, his eyes pleading. I made mistakes, he stammered, the words clearly costing him. We can fix this, together, like we used to. Used to? He meant when I fixed everything and he took the credit. Mother followed, tears streaming down her face, her carefully constructed composure finally shattering. Oh, my darling girl, she wept, reaching for my hand. Can you ever forgive us? We didn't know what else to do. We need your help. We have nothing left. Her performance was, as always, impeccable, but this time, the desperation in her eyes was undeniably real. Then came Elise, her usual arrogance stripped away, leaving behind a raw, unfamiliar vulnerability. I'm so sorry, she whispered, her voice choked with tears that, for once, I believed were genuine. I've been a terrible sister, a terrible person. Please, don't do this. Don't leave us with nothing. James was notably absent. He'd already made his escape. I listened to their apologies, their pleas for mercy, for financial help, for second chances. I looked at their tear-streaked faces, their expressions of remorse, and I felt a profound sadness, not for them, but for the years I had wasted, the love I had squandered on people who were incapable of truly valuing it. With quiet dignity, I acknowledged their apologies. I hear you, I said, my voice steady. My breath was even, my hands resting calmly on the cool leather of the portfolio Eleanor had prepared, the one containing the final signed documents. And I accept your apologies for what they're worth now. I paused, letting my words sink in. But I cannot give you what you're asking for. Your remorse, I believe, stems from the consequences you're now facing, not from a genuine regret for how you treated me for all those years. You had countless opportunities to change, to be different. You chose not to. I closed the portfolio with a soft, decisive click. The time for second chances from me is over. You'll have to find your own way now. Fast forward 6 months. The scent of salt air and jasmine filled my senses as I stood on the balcony of my coastal villa, grandmother's beach house, now lovingly restored. The company, under my leadership and with Eleanor as my trusted partner, had been restructured from the ground up. We'd cut away the rot, streamlined operations, and were building something ethical, sustainable, something grandmother would have been proud of. My family, stripped of their unearned wealth and privileges, were slowly, painfully finding their own way. Elise, humbled and surprisingly resilient, was working a retail job in a small boutique. The pay was meager, the hours long, but for the first time in her life, she was earning her own keep. A flicker of genuine self-respect in her eyes when I'd run into her once by chance. Mother and father had downsized significantly, moving into a small, rented apartment. Father's health had stabilized, though he was a shadow of his former self. Mother, I heard, had started volunteering at a local library, a quiet, unassuming existence so far removed from her former life of glittering social events. James was attempting to rebuild his shattered reputation, working for a small, obscure firm, the swagger gone from his step. They were surviving, not thriving, but perhaps in their own ways they were finally learning the lessons life had tried to teach them all along. Eleanor joined me on the balcony, a glass of chilled white wine in each hand. We clinked our glasses, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. To second chances, she said, her eyes twinkling. And a hard-won peace, I added, taking a sip. The path had been arduous, the betrayals deep, the pain at times overwhelming. But my revenge, if you could even call it that, hadn't been about destroying them. It had been about refusing to be destroyed by them again. It had been about reclaiming my life, my voice, my future. And in doing so, I had finally, truly found myself. The ocean stretched out before me, vast and limitless, a reflection of the possibilities that now lay open. And for the first time in a very, very long time, I felt completely, utterly free.